The promise that cannot be broken. The night was quiet on the small planet of Aeron 5. The twin moons shone brightly in the dark sky, casting a soft glow over the refugee camp. Small tents made from old fabric stood in neat rows, and the sound of soft breathing filled the air as people slept, dreaming of safety after years of war. But Ethan Drake could not sleep. He sat alone near the camp's edge, staring at the stars. His hands, rough and scarred from battles long ago, held a small locket. Inside was a picture of his old squad, men and women who had fought beside him in the war against the alien race called the Xilari. All of them were gone now. Ethan had made a promise on the day he buried them, a promise to never fight again. No matter what happened, no matter how bad things got, he would never pick up a weapon again. He had seen too much blood, too much pain. His hands were tired of war. Suddenly, a soft sound broke the silence. It was faint, almost like a whisper, but Ethan's sharp senses caught it. He stood up slowly, looking around. The sound came again, closer this time. A small figure stumbled out from the darkness, falling to the ground just a few feet away from him. Ethan rushed forward, his heart beating fast. He kneeled beside the figure and realized it was a child, an alien child. Her skin was a pale blue, with glowing green lines running along her arms and neck. Her large black eyes were filled with fear and pain. Ethan knew immediately. She was Xilari. Memories of war flashed through his mind, but he pushed them away. This was just a child. "You're hurt," he said softly, reaching out to check her wounds. She flinched, pulling away. "No, no," she whispered in a shaky voice. They will find me." "Who?" Ethan asked, his voice calm but firm. "Who is after you?" Before she could answer, Ethan heard a noise from the forest beyond the camp. Heavy footsteps, voices speaking in a language he did not understand. Someone was looking for her. Ethan's instincts screamed at him to run. This wasn't his fight. He had made a promise. He was done with war. But then he looked at the child. She was trembling, her small hands clutching at her side where a deep wound bled slowly. She would not survive if they found her. Ethan let out a slow breath. "Come on," he whispered, lifting her gently in his arms. "We have to hide." He moved quickly through the camp, careful not to wake anyone. He knew a small storage shed behind the medic tent. It wasn't much, but it would keep them hidden for now. Inside the shed, Ethan placed the child down on an old blanket and started to clean her wound. She winced but said nothing. "What's your name?" Ethan asked, trying to keep her calm. "Kaya," she whispered. "All right, Kaya. I'm Ethan." "You're safe now," he said, though he wasn't sure it was true. "They want me. Because of what I know," Kaya said softly. Ethan frowned. "What do you know?" But before she could answer, a voice echoed through the camp. "Find the girl." Ethan's blood turned cold. The voice was harsh, filled with anger. He peeked through a crack in the shed wall and saw figures in dark armor, carrying weapons that glowed faintly in the night. They moved through the camp, searching every tent. Kaya clutched Ethan's arm tightly. "Please, don't let them take me," she begged. Ethan closed his eyes, taking a deep breath. "I made a promise," he whispered to himself. "I can't fight again." But as he looked at Kaya, he knew he had no choice. If he didn't fight, she would die. Ethan opened a small crate in the shed and pulled out a simple knife, his only weapon left from the war. His hand shook as he held it. "Stay here. Don't move," he told Kaya firmly. He slipped out of the shed quietly, moving like a shadow. His heart pounded as he approached the nearest soldier. Ethan moved fast, knocking the weapon from the soldier's hands and pressing the knife to his throat. "Who are you?" Ethan hissed. "We want the girl," the soldier replied. "She's not what you think. She's dangerous." Ethan's eyes narrowed. A child. Dangerous. Before he could ask more, another soldier spotted him. "There he is." Ethan cursed under his breath, and knocked the first soldier out. He ran back to the shed, but when he got there, Kaya was gone. The door was wide open, and her small footprints led out into the forest. "Damn it," Ethan muttered. He grabbed a small communicator from his belt. "If I break my promise tonight," he whispered, "then so be it." He activated the communicator, sending out a silent call for help. Then, with his knife in hand, Ethan disappeared into the darkness, following Kaya's trail. The war he had sworn to leave behind had found him once again. The child's secret and the ruthless hunters. The forest was dark and silent, except for the sound of Ethan Drake's footsteps as he moved swiftly through the thick undergrowth. The cool night air stung his face, but he barely noticed. His mind was focused on one thing: finding Kaya before the hunters did. The young Silari child was injured, scared, and alone. She wouldn't survive long if the soldiers found her first. Ethan's chest tightened at the thought. He had promised never to fight again, but promises didn't matter when an innocent life was at stake. "Stay strong, kid," he whispered to himself. "I'm coming." Suddenly, he heard it, a faint rustling in the bushes ahead. He crouched low, knife ready in his hand, and moved silently toward the sound. But instead of Kaya, he found something else. A small device lay half buried in the dirt. It was sleek, metallic, and pulsing with a faint blue light. Ethan recognized it instantly. A tracker. "Damn it," he muttered. The soldiers weren't just searching blindly. They were tracking Kaya's every move. Ethan grabbed the device and smashed it under his boot, but he knew it was too late. If they had placed one tracker, there would be more. He had to move fast. He pushed forward, his sharp eyes scanning the ground for signs of Kaya. Then he saw them, small footprints leading deeper into the forest. Ethan followed, his heart pounding in his chest. Minutes passed, feeling like hours, until he finally spotted her. Kaya was leaning against a tree, breathing heavily. Her wound was worse than he thought. Blood soaked her side, and her hands trembled as she tried to press down on it. "Kaya," Ethan whispered, stepping closer. She gasped, eyes wide with fear, but when she saw it was him, relief washed over her face. "You came," she whispered weakly. "Of course I did," Ethan replied softly. "I'm not leaving you behind." He crouched beside her, pulling out a small medkit from his belt. Carefully, he bandaged her wound, trying to stop the bleeding. "They're coming," Kaya whispered. "You should leave me. Save yourself." Ethan shook his head. "Not a chance, kid." Tears filled Kaya's large black eyes. "You don't understand. They want me because of what I am." Ethan frowned. "What are you talking about?" Kaya took a shaky breath. "I'm not just a child. My blood, it holds something powerful, something dangerous." Ethan stared at her, confused. "What do you mean?" Kaya closed her eyes, trying to explain. "A long time ago, humans created something, a weapon, but not just any weapon. It was alive. It could change minds, erase memories, control entire species. My blood, it's the key to activating it." Ethan felt his blood run cold. A weapon that could control minds. That was more dangerous than any gun or bomb. "Why you?" he asked softly. "My ancestors helped build it," Kaya replied. "But they realized it was too dangerous, so they hid it and locked it with a genetic code. My blood carries that code." Ethan exhaled slowly. "So that's why they're after you." Kaya nodded. "If they get me, they'll have the power to control the whole galaxy." Suddenly, a sharp voice echoed through the forest. "We know you're here, soldier." Ethan's eyes narrowed. The soldiers were close. Too close. "We need to move," he whispered. He lifted Kaya gently into his arms and started to run. The forest seemed endless, but Ethan knew he had to find a safe place fast. He zigzagged through the trees, trying to avoid detection. But then, a blast ripped through the air, hitting a tree just inches from him. The explosion sent him tumbling to the ground, Kaya slipping from his arms. Ethan groaned in pain as he scrambled to his feet, grabbing Kaya's hand. But before they could move, they were surrounded. 5 soldiers, dressed in black armor with glowing visors, aimed their weapons at them. "End of the line," one of them sneered. Ethan's mind raced. He was unarmed except for his knife, and Kaya was too weak to run. Then the lead soldier stepped forward, removing his helmet. His face was scared, his eyes cold and emotionless. "You should have stayed out of this, Drake," he said. Ethan's eyes widened in shock. He knew that face. "Commander Vex," Ethan whispered. Vex smirked, surprised. "You thought I died in the last war, didn't you?" Ethan clenched his fists. Vex had been a human commander, once loyal to Earth, but he had betrayed them, selling human secrets to alien warlords for power and wealth. "What do you want with the girl?" Ethan demanded. Vex's eyes gleamed with cruel amusement. "The same thing everyone wants. Power. With her blood, I can control the weapon. I can control everything." "Over my dead body," Ethan growled. Vex laughed. "That can be arranged." Before Vex could give the order to fire, Ethan grabbed a small smoke grenade from his belt and threw it to the ground. A thick cloud of smoke filled the air, giving him just enough cover to grab Kaya and run. But as they fled deeper into the forest, Ethan knew one thing for sure. This was only the beginning. The reluctant warrior awakens. Ethan Drake's breathing was heavy as he sprinted through the dense forest, carrying Kaya in his arms. Each step felt heavier than the last, but he couldn't stop now. Not when Commander Vex and his ruthless soldiers were right behind them. Branches scratched at his face, and the weight of the past pressed down on him like a mountain. He had sworn never to fight again. But tonight, that promise was slipping further and further away. Kaya clung to him tightly, her soft voice barely a whisper. "I'm sorry," she said, her words shaky. Ethan's jaw tightened. "Don't apologize, kid. This isn't your fault." "But you didn't want this," she whispered. "You promised never to fight again." Ethan's grip tightened around her. Sometimes, promises get broken. Suddenly, a loud blast echoed through the forest, shaking the ground beneath them. Trees splintered as one of Vex's soldiers fired a plasma cannon. Ethan dove behind a fallen log just in time, shielding Kaya from the explosion. He peeked over the log, his mind racing. He couldn't keep running forever. They needed a plan. "Kaya," he whispered, "is there anywhere safe? Anywhere we can go?" Kaya nodded weakly. "There's an old human outpost, not far from here." Ethan's eyes narrowed. "An outpost? From the war?" "Yes," Kaya said softly. "My people found it years ago. It's hidden, underground." Ethan knew that if they could reach an old human base, they might find weapons, supplies, maybe even help. But they had to move fast. "Hang on," he said, lifting Kaya once more. They weaved through the forest, dodging blasts and shouts from the soldiers behind them. Ethan's body screamed for rest, but his mind was focused. He had been a soldier once, a damn good one. And those instincts were waking up. Finally, they reached a large cliffside covered in vines and moss. Kaya pointed to a narrow opening barely big enough for a person to squeeze through. "There," she whispered. Ethan pushed the vines aside and squeezed through the gap. On the other side, they found themselves in a dark, narrow tunnel leading deep into the cliffside. Ethan helped Kaya to her feet, supporting her as they moved deeper into the tunnel. After what felt like an eternity, they'd reached a large metallic door covered in dust and old human markings. "This is it," Kaya said softly. Ethan placed his hand on a panel beside the door. For a moment, nothing happened. But then, the panel lit up, scanning his palm. A mechanical voice spoke softly. "Human presence detected. Access granted." The door slid open with a hiss, revealing a large underground base filled with old technology, weapons, and supplies left behind from the war. Ethan helped Kaya onto a small cot and quickly searched for medical supplies. He cleaned and dressed her wound properly this time, making sure she was stable. As she rested, Ethan explored the base. Dust covered everything, but he recognized the equipment instantly. Old human rifles, armor suits, and even a small ship, half buried under debris. He sighed, rubbing his forehead. "I didn't want to do this again," he whispered to himself. But then he heard Kaya's voice. "You don't have to fight, if you don't want to." Ethan turned to see her sitting up, watching him with those large black eyes. "I'm not a fighter," she said softly. "I don't want anyone to get hurt because of me." Ethan knelt beside her. "Kaya, this isn't your fault. You didn't choose to have this power in your blood." Tears filled her eyes. "But now, you're in danger because of me." Ethan took a deep breath. "I've been in danger my whole life. But this time, it's different. This time, it's worth it." Kaya looked confused. "Why?" Ethan smiled softly. "Because saving one innocent life is worth more than any promise I made to myself." Before Kaya could respond, a loud boom echoed through the base. The ground shook violently. "They found us," Ethan muttered. The security screens lit up, showing Vex and his soldiers blasting the cliffside, trying to break in. Ethan stood up, grabbing an old rifle from the wall. It felt heavy in his hands, but familiar. "I'm going to stop them," he said firmly. Kaya's eyes widened. "But you said you wouldn't fight again." Ethan smirked. "I said I wouldn't fight a war. This is just cleaning up some trash." Kaya giggled softly, despite the fear in her eyes. Ethan moved to the base's defense system, activating old turrets and shields, but it wouldn't hold for long. Vex's voice echoed through a speaker. "Give me the girl, Drake, and I'll let you live." Ethan scoffed. "Not in this lifetime, Vex." "Then die like the rest," Vex growled. The battle began. Ethan fired from cover, taking down soldiers with precise shots. But there were too many. He knew he couldn't hold them off forever. Suddenly, Kaya's voice called out, "Ethan, I have an idea." He turned to her. "What is it?" "I can disable their weapons," she said. "My blood, it can send a signal to their systems, but I need time." Ethan nodded. "Then I'll buy you that time." He fought harder, faster, his old training kicking in fully. He was no longer just a man. He was a soldier again. But as he fought, a single thought lingered in his mind. How much longer can I keep breaking my promise before I lose myself completely? The chase across the stars. The underground base trembled with every blast as Commander Vex's forces pounded at the entrance. Ethan Drake gritted his teeth as he crouched behind a crate, firing precise shots at the advancing soldiers who had managed to breach the outer defenses. "Kaya, how's it going?" Ethan shouted, ducking just as a plasma bolt scorched the wall behind him. Kaya sat cross-legged on the floor, her hands glowing faintly as she concentrated. In front of her was an old human console, wires connected from it to a small vial of her blood. She was sending out a biosignal to disable the soldiers' weapons, but it was taking longer than she thought. "Almost there," she whispered, sweat beading on her forehead. "No pressure," Ethan called back sarcastically, firing another shot that sent 2 soldiers crashing to the ground. Suddenly, the sound of weapons charging stopped. Silence filled the air. Ethan peeked over the crate and saw the soldiers looking at their rifles in confusion. Their weapons had shut down. Kaya let out a sigh of relief. "I did it." But Ethan wasn't celebrating yet. He knew Vex too well. "Fall back," one of the soldiers shouted. "We need to regroup." As the remaining soldiers retreated, Ethan sprinted back to Kaya. "Good job, kid," he said with a tired smile. "But we're not safe yet. Vex always has a backup plan." Kaya looked at him, fear in her eyes. "What do we do now?" Ethan glanced at the half-buried ship in the corner of the base. "We run." Hours later, The old human ship soared through the stars, its engines humming softly. Ethan sat in the pilot's seat, scanning the galaxy for any sign of pursuit. Kaya sat beside him, hugging her knees. "Where are we going?" she asked softly. Ethan sighed. "We need answers, and I know just the person who might have them." Kaya tilted her head. "Who?" "An old war general," Ethan replied. "General Arden. He fought in the Human-Xilari War. If anyone knows what your blood is connected to, it's him." Kaya frowned. "But will he help us?" Ethan chuckled dryly. "That depends on his mood." Suddenly, the ship's sensors beeped loudly. Ethan's eyes widened as he saw a fleet of ships on the radar, heading straight for them. "Vex," he growled. Kaya's eyes filled with panic. How did they find us so fast? Ethan clenched his jaw. They must have placed another tracker on the base. "Hold on." He pushed the ship's engines to full power, weaving through asteroid fields and narrow star corridors. The chase had begun. On the command deck of the lead ship, Commander Vex watched with cold eyes as Ethan's ship dodged and darted through space. "Sir," a soldier reported, "they're heading towards the Zyra Nebula." Vex smirked. "Good. Let them run. They can't hide forever." Inside Ethan's ship, alarms blared as plasma blasts from the pursuing fleet lit up the darkness of space. Kaya clutched the sides of her seat. "Are we going to make it?" she asked, her voice shaking. Ethan gave her a reassuring grin. "I've flown through worse." As they entered the thick gas clouds of the Zyra Nebula, the enemy fleet lost sight of them. The nebula was known for its deadly radiation and confusing magnetic fields. It was a dangerous place, but it was their only chance. Hours passed as they navigated through the nebula, until finally they reached a desolate planet with towering mountains and endless deserts. Ethan landed the ship near an old bunker carved into the side of a cliff. "Stay close," he told Kaya as they stepped out onto the rocky surface. Inside the bunker, the air was stale, but the technology was still active. And sitting in a large chair, surrounded by holographic maps and old weapons, was General Arden. His eyes, sharp despite his age, narrowed as he saw Ethan. "Drake," Arden said with a smirk. "I thought you retired." Ethan chuckled. "I thought you were dead." Arden laughed, but his smile faded when he noticed Kaya. "See Larry?" he asked, standing up. "She's with me," Ethan replied quickly. "We need your help." Arden's eyes softened as he saw the fear in Kaya's eyes. "What's going on?" "Drake." Ethan explained everything: the soldiers, Commander Vex, and the secret locked in Kaya's blood. Arden listened carefully, nodding slowly. "I knew this day would come," Arden said finally. Ethan frowned. "What do you mean?" Arden sighed. "Project Dawn. That's what the weapon is called. It was humanity's last hope during the war. A machine that could rewrite the minds of entire species, but it was never meant to be used." Kaya's voice was barely a whisper. "Why not?" "Because it doesn't just erase hate," Arden explained grimly. "It erases everything. Cultures, memories, identities. It turns entire civilizations into nothing." Ethan's stomach turned, and Kaya's blood can activate it. Arden nodded. Her ancestors helped build it. Only their genetic code can start it. And now, she's the last one left. Kaya's hands trembled. "But I don't want that power." Ethan placed a hand on her shoulder. "We won't let Vex get it." But Arden's face was grave. "Vex isn't the only one looking for it. There are others. And if they find out what she can do, they'll never stop hunting her." Ethan's fists clenched. "Then we have to destroy the weapon." Arden shook his head. "It's not that simple. The weapon is hidden deep inside an abandoned human station, on the edge of the galaxy. And getting there won't be easy." Ethan smirked. "I didn't sign up for easy." Kaya, though scared, stood up. "I'll go too." Ethan looked at her with pride. "We'll protect you, kid. no matter what. But as they prepared to leave, Arden's final words echoed in Ethan's mind. Be careful, Drake. Sometimes, to save the galaxy, you have to become the very thing you fear the most. Ethan knew what that meant. To save Kaya, to destroy the weapon, he would have to do the one thing he swore never to do again: become a soldier. The forgotten truth of humanity's past. The stars outside the ship window blurred into streaks of light as the starlight horizon. The old ship Ethan and Kaya had stolen rocketed through the galaxy. The mission had become clearer by the hour. They had to reach the forgotten human station, buried deep at the edge of space, to stop Commander Vex from activating Project Dawn. Ethan sat in the pilot's seat, his knuckles white from gripping the controls. He hadn't felt this alive in years. The hum of the ship was steady, but beneath it, there was a growing tension. His body was ready for what was to come, but his mind was uncertain. He had broken his promise to himself. He was fighting again. Behind him, Kaya sat quietly in the small cabin, her eyes fixed on the console screen that showed their course. You okay? Ethan called out over his shoulder. Kaya didn't answer right away. She was lost in thought, her small hands clenched around the edges of her seat. After a long silence, she spoke. I don't know how to feel anymore, she whispered. Ethan's voice softened. You don't have to figure everything out right now. No, I do, Kaya said with more strength. I'm not just scared for me. I'm scared for everyone. If I'm the key to Project Dawn, that means I could destroy everything. Ethan exhaled slowly. No one's going to let that happen. But Kaya shook her head. That's not the problem. The problem is, what if I don't have a choice? Ethan turned in his seat, meeting her gaze. You do have a choice. We'll make sure of it. Kaya nodded but said nothing more. She stared out the window, lost in the stars, but Ethan could see the fear in her eyes. It was the same fear that haunted him, the fear of becoming something they never wanted to be. The ship jolted as it entered the Bastion Nebula, a place known for its dangerous magnetic storms and navigational traps. Ethan swore under his breath as the ship bucked in the turbulence. We need to pass through this. Hold on, he called back to Kaya. As the ship continued to shake, a flash of light caught his eye. A distress signal blinked on his screen. Ethan quickly accessed the transmission, only to find a message from General Arden. Drake, you need to know something. The general's voice echoed through the static. The weapon, Project Dawn. It's not just a tool for control. It's something far more dangerous. Humanity's past holds a truth about it, and you need to hear it. Ethan's stomach twisted. What the hell is he talking about? He listened closely as Arden's voice came through again. The weapon was designed by human scientists over 100 years ago, long before the war began. It was meant to rewrite the minds of enemies, yes, but its true purpose was darker, much darker. Ethan's eyes widened as he remembered the mention of the machine rewriting entire cultures, entire species. But what Arden was saying now felt even more sinister. It wasn't meant to control enemies. It was meant to control humanity. Arden's voice lowered, now barely a whisper, to erase all memories of the wars, the bloodshed, and create a new race of humans, one without hate, without war, a perfect humanity. But something went wrong. The machine malfunctioned. It didn't just erase memories. It erased people. It erased their very essence. Ethan's heart pounded. He turned to Kaya, his voice thick with fear. Kaya, your blood. It's the key to activating that nightmare. Kaya looked up, her face pale. That's not what I want. I don't want to become part of that. The message from Arden crackled back to life. Drake, you need to know this. If the weapon is activated again, it will not just rewrite minds. It will erase the very foundation of who we are, our memories, our emotions. It will turn humanity into something unrecognizable, something empty. Ethan's mind raced. He had always known that the weapon was dangerous, but he had no idea it could do this. He had thought it was just a tool for control. But this was far worse. This was a weapon that would wipe out everything that made people who they were. Every human emotion, every struggle, every story, gone. "We can't let it happen," Ethan said, voice trembling with the weight of the truth. "We won't," Kaya said, her voice trembling too. The silence between them felt suffocating, as if the ship was floating through the emptiness of space itself. Neither of them knew how to move forward, but the truth was clear now. The weapon had to be destroyed at all costs. But Arden's voice came through again, more urgent now. "Drake, be careful. The station where the weapon is hidden. It's not just an old outpost. It's a trap. Vex knows where you're going." Ethan's eyes widened. He knew. Arden's voice was grim. "He's been tracking you the whole time." Ethan's heart sank. Then we're walking into a death trap. But there was no turning back now. If they didn't stop Project Dawn, the galaxy would fall into chaos. They had to destroy the weapon before it was too late. Ethan's hand tightened around the ship's controls as he prepared to enter the final leg of their journey. He looked at Kaya, and for a moment he saw the fear in her eyes, and the courage beneath it. "We'll make it," he said softly. "We'll stop Vex. We'll stop this weapon. Together." Kaya nodded, taking a deep breath. Together. The ship hurtled toward the unknown, toward a station that held the key to either salvation or destruction. And as they neared the edge of the galaxy, the truth of humanity's past and its terrifying future awaited them. The war that should never have been. The station loomed ahead of them like a ghost from the past. Built into the core of a dying star, it was a place lost to time. A symbol of human ambition and fear, a relic of the war that had once ravaged the galaxy. Ethan Drake's heart beat faster as the starlight horizon approached the dark, crumbling station. It was supposed to be abandoned, forgotten, hidden from the universe. But as they neared, they saw the truth. The station had never been abandoned at all. Vex was already here. The dark silhouette of his flagship, an immense warship, hung just outside the station, its guns aimed at the ancient structure. Ethan's stomach churned. Vex had been waiting for them. "They're here," Kaya whispered, looking up from the ship's viewport. Her face was pale, but there was no fear in her voice, just a quiet resolve. Ethan's grip tightened on the controls. "We can't turn back now. We've come too far." He guided the ship into the docking bay of the station, hoping to find shelter, but knowing that they had walked straight into a trap. The docking bay doors slid open with a screech, revealing a dark and empty interior. As soon as the ship's landing gear touched down, the doors slammed shut behind them, locking them in. "We've been trapped," Ethan muttered, standing up. "Get ready." Kaya followed him as they made their way down the narrow corridors of the station. The place was eerily quiet, save for the hum of the station's old machinery. The walls were lined with strange alien symbols, remnants of the forgotten war that had once torn apart civilizations. "This place feels like a tomb," Kaya whispered. Ethan didn't answer. He knew what the station represented. It was humanity's last attempt to control the galaxy, to control the future. But it had failed, and now they were here, at the heart of that failure. As they moved deeper into the station, they found the entrance to the central chamber. Inside, the remnants of Project Dawn stood waiting. The massive machine was nothing like Ethan had imagined. It wasn't just a weapon. It was a mind, a consciousness wrapped in steel. The walls of the chamber seemed to pulse with the energy of the machine. Ethan's hand went to his holster, but just as he moved, the room went dark. The lights flickered back on, revealing Commander Vex, standing at the far side of the room, flanked by his soldiers. "I knew you would come, Drake," Vex said, his voice cold and filled with malice. "You always were predictable." Ethan's hand tightened on the grip of his gun, but he didn't draw it yet. "I didn't come to fight you, Vex. I came to destroy that thing." He pointed toward the machine. Vex laughed. "You think you can destroy it? You've walked into the trap. Project Dawn is no longer a weapon, it's the future. It will rewrite everything. Erase the wars, erase the pain. Humanity will start anew. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. He knew the dangers of Project Dawn, but hearing it from Vex, hearing his twisted vision, made it all the more real. This wasn't just about control anymore. This was about erasing everything humanity had fought for. The struggles, the failures, the triumphs. All of it would be gone. "You're wrong, Vex," Ethan said, his voice low. "You can't rewrite history. You can't erase what makes us human." Kaya stepped forward, her eyes locked on Vex. "If you activate it, you'll destroy everything, not just the war. You'll destroy our very souls." Vex smiled. "That's the point, girl. The human race has failed. It needs to be reborn. This is the only way." Ethan's blood boiled. "Not like this. We won't let you do it." Before anyone could react, the machine began to hum. Lights blinked on, and the massive core of Project Dawn started to glow with a brilliant, otherworldly energy. Ethan looked at Kaya, his voice urgent. "We need to destroy it now." But Kaya hesitated. She looked at the machine, at the power it held. She could feel it calling to her. The blood in her veins was the key to activating it. And yet, it was also the key to destroying it. She knew what had to be done, but she was terrified. "I can't," she whispered, her voice breaking. "If I destroy it, I'll never be human again." Ethan stepped closer to her. "Kaya, listen to me. You're already more human than anyone I've ever met. You've got more heart in you than any of them." Kaya's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded. She stepped toward the core of the machine, her blood pulsing with power, ready to act. But before she could reach it, Vex moved. He rushed toward her, his blade drawn, aiming to stop her before she could make her choice. Ethan acted without thinking. He drew his gun and fired, the bullet striking Vex's weapon arm. Vex staggered back, rage filling his eyes. "You fool," he spat, clutching his arm. "You have no idea what you're doing." Kaya, now standing before the machine, looked down at her blood-stained hands. She closed her eyes. "I'm sorry," she whispered, and she pressed her hand against the core. The machine's hum grew louder, a deafening crescendo. Lights exploded in every direction as the energy built up. Then, with a deafening roar, the entire station shook, as though the galaxy itself were about to tear apart. For a moment, time seemed to stop. Ethan watched in horror and awe as Kaya's blood activated the machine, and it began to pulse with unimaginable power. But then, as quickly as it started, the energy reversed. The core of Project Dawn flickered and began to collapse in on itself. The weapon was being destroyed from within. The lights in the room flickered out completely, leaving them in total darkness. When the lights returned, the machine was gone. There was nothing left but the wreckage. Kaya collapsed to her knees, her body drained of energy, but her eyes were clear. Ethan ran to her, kneeling beside her. "You did it." Kaya smiled weakly, her voice barely audible. "We did it." And then, from the shadows, came Vex, weakened, but still alive. His eyes burned with fury. "This isn't over, Drake. I'll find another way. I'll." Ethan turned to face him, his eyes cold and filled with determination. "Not this time." He stepped forward, raising his weapon. "This ends here." A soldier's promise, shattered and rebuilt. The station, once a dark and terrifying symbol of humanity's forgotten past, now lay in ruins. The hum of Project Dawn had faded into nothing, and the wreckage of the machine scattered across the floor like broken bones. Kaya sat on the cold, cracked floor, her face pale but serene, her hands still tingling with the remnants of the power she had unleashed. Ethan stood nearby, watching her closely, the weight of everything they had just faced pressing down on him. The fight with Vex was over, but the war inside his own heart had only just begun. He had broken his promise. For years, he had sworn to never pick up a weapon again. He had promised himself that he would never return to the battlefields, never let the violence consume him. And yet, here he was, standing amidst the ruins of the greatest weapon ever created, doing the very thing he had sworn to avoid. His hands trembled slightly, and he clenched them into fists. He had done what needed to be done. He had destroyed Project Dawn. He had saved the galaxy from a future that would have been nothing but a hollow shell of itself. But at what cost? Kaya looked up at him, her dark eyes filled with understanding. "You did what you had to do," she said quietly. Ethan didn't answer at first. He was still haunted by the look in Vex's eyes, the way the man had spoken of humanity's rebirth, as if erasing everything that made them human would somehow make them better. It sickened him, but what sickened him more was that Vex had been right about one thing. Humanity could never go back to the way it was. No matter what happened next, everything had changed. Kaya stood up slowly, her legs shaking, but her resolve firm. She walked over to Ethan, her eyes never leaving his. "It's over now," she said softly. Ethan nodded, but he didn't feel the weight of relief that should have come with the victory. Instead, he felt empty. The sound of footsteps echoed in the wreckage, pulling his attention away from his thoughts. He turned to see General Arden, standing in the doorway of the chamber, his face tired but filled with pride. "You did it," Arden said, his voice rough. "You stopped it." Ethan didn't reply immediately. He just stared at the general, his mind still lost in the aftermath. "Is it really over?" Ethan asked, his voice low and uncertain. Arden gave him a measured look. "The battle is over, yes. But the war, that's something we'll never truly escape. The questions about what humanity could have been, what we could have done differently, those will linger. But for now, you did the right thing." Kaya stepped forward, placing a hand on Ethan's arm. "We did the right thing." Ethan turned to look at her, her eyes steady and filled with a quiet strength he hadn't noticed before. She had been just a scared child when he first found her, but now she was someone who had helped save the galaxy. She was stronger than she realized. He gave her a small smile, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Yeah, we did." Suddenly, a sharp beep broke the silence. Arden stepped over to a nearby terminal and activated it. The screen flickered to life, showing a holographic map of the galaxy, now eerily calm. "What is it?" Ethan asked. Arden's face darkened. "There's something you need to see." The map shifted, zooming in on a new fleet emerging from the farthest reaches of the galaxy. Ethan's eyes narrowed. The fleet wasn't from the human forces, nor any species he recognized. "They're still out there," Arden said grimly. "The ones who want the weapon. The ones who never stop hunting." Ethan clenched his fists. Vex wasn't the only one. "There's more." Arden nodded. "Much more. The war never really ends, Drake. You can't destroy a weapon like Project Dawn and expect everyone to forget about it." Kaya stepped forward, her eyes focused on the map. "What do we do now?" Ethan looked at the fleet, his mind spinning. He had made his choice. He had chosen to fight again. But the fight would never truly end. The galaxy would always have threats, always have enemies, always have darkness lurking in the corners. He had promised himself he would never fight again. But that promise wasn't just his to keep anymore. "This isn't just about fighting," Ethan said quietly. "It's about standing up when everything feels broken. It's about keeping hope alive." He turned to Kaya, his gaze soft but firm. "We'll keep going. We'll make sure Project Dawn never comes back. We'll protect what's left." Kaya nodded, her face full of determination. "We'll rebuild." Ethan looked back at Arden. "Prepare the fleet. We're not done yet." The general looked at him, his eyes hard but filled with respect. "You know what you're doing." Ethan gave a wry smile. "No, but I'm damn sure going to try." As the lights in the station flickered, Ethan realized the truth. The soldier in him could never truly be silenced. He could bury the weapons, leave the battlefield, make a home of peace, But war, it seemed, was always lurking at the edges of the horizon. And sometimes, when the fight was the only way to save what mattered, you had to pick up the pieces of your broken promise and use them for good. Ethan wasn't sure where this path would take him, but he knew one thing for sure. As long as he had Kaya by his side, and as long as he still had breath in his lungs, he would never stop fighting for what was right.